All right, good evening, everybody. The Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force meeting number 3. Welcome, everyone. And let me first introduce myself. I'm Walter Clark, your co-chair of the task force. I'm also a planning commissioner for Fairfax County. And co-chair Tim Sargent is here as well, planning commissioner for Fairfax County as well. For those on this call that may not have known that and on the call for the first time. And to conduct this meeting wholly electronically and effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance of Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force needs to make certain findings and determinations for record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask in advance for your patience, please. First, because of each member of the task force is participating in this meeting from separate locations, we must verify that a quorum of members in participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and is at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I am going to conduct a roll call and ask that each task force member participating in this meeting to state your name and location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each other colleagues following this roll call. And we will vote to establish that we have members can hear every other member. So the roll call. Commissioner Tim Sargent.
President at the Mount Vernon Government Office Center.
Hillary Clausen.
This is Hillary Clausen. I'm from Martin, Virginia.
Catherine Ward. Catherine Ward.
This is Catherine. I'm at my home on Gladstone Place.
Gretchen Waltz. I believe she's going to be delayed. Or David Levine.
This is David Levine, and I'm at my home in Alexandria, Virginia.
Holly Doherty. Evan Kaufman.
This is Evan Kaufman, and I'm participating from Richmond, Virginia.
Mary Payton. Mary Payton. Queenie Cox.
This is Queenie Cox, and I'm participating from my home in Gum Springs, Virginia.
Ellen Young.
This is Ellen Young, and I am participating from Bellevue in Alexandria.
Hamid Munir. Hamid Munir. Lynn Pasco. Lynn Pasco. Tracy Wood. Tracy Wood. I saw her. She was. Okay, maybe she dropped off the call. Okay, I move each member voice may be adequately heard in each other member of the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force. I will now turn over the virtual gavel to the co-chair as we move this motion.
Do I hear a motion to approve? We're going from the chairman, co-chair. Do I hear a second? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard in every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures and the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for the public to access this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the task force to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting. And that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the task force and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the task force may conduct this meeting electronically through the dedicated video and audio conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by registering through the meeting link on the track and nomination page of the SSPA website at fairfaxcounty.gov/plan-development/plan-amendments/south/track-nomination, or by calling 1-408-418-9388 TTY 711 and entering access code 129-486-0494. It is so moved.
Motion has been made. Do I hear a second?
Second,
Who made the second, please?
Ms. Ellen Young.
Okay, Gretchen Young made the second, and Catherine Ward as well, I believe. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Finally, it is next required that all of the matters addressed in today's agenda must address the emergency itself and necessary for continuity in the Fairfax County government and/or the statutory requirement necessary to continue operations and discharge of the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved.
Motion has been made. Do I hear a second? Anyone second?
This is Evan Coffin, I
Hillary
second.
Clausen.
Okay, Evan Coffin seconds, and so does Hillary Clausen. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you very much. And I believe the task force will receive some public comment, written public comments, so I want to make note of that for the record. As we go into our agenda, let's see. Sorry, where's she from?
And Walter, this is Graham. I just wanted to point out
Jim.
that I believe a couple of additional task force members have joined us. So Mary Payton, Holly Doherty, and Tracy Wood are all now.
All right.
And Lynn Pasco just texted me. He is desperately trying to get in, so maybe somebody can see if he's trying and let him in.
I'll try to send him an attendee link and get him in that way. Thanks for letting me know, Catherine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We should probably check just to make sure that the task force members can hear everybody.
Yeah.
This is Tracy Wood. Yes, I can hear everyone. Thanks.
Hi, this is Mary. I can hear.
Holly? Did Holly Doherty join us?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Walter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, going down our agenda, you see that we have an additional task force meeting that we scheduled for Tuesday, September 22nd. So I wanted to make sure that we're all aware that we will have that meeting. And for that meeting, we will hear or we'll take a final vote on a couple of the nominations that we will be hearing. We'll take the final vote for the Ingleside, and we'll be taking a final vote on the Bellevue nomination on those particular nights. And as well as we'll hear the staff presentation for the Hilltop Village Center, which is actually in the Lee District. We will not be voting on that, but it's more for knowledge base because it is very close to us, to our district, and of great concerns for many of the folks that live here in our district. The actual nominations presentation for the Hilltop Village Center will be held on September the 14th. The Lead District will be hearing that. So as a member of the public, you can join in at the Lead District website to listen in on that meeting and how that process will go. With that, I'll turn it over to Graham or Aaron.
Hi, Walter. I just put up the schedule for the meetings that you just mentioned. Can everyone see that?
No,
No.
not yet.
No. Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
So task force meeting date, so here we are on the 1st tonight. Then the 15th, you see where we have our meeting, which was originally supposed to be our last meeting, but we added an additional meeting because of the schedule and everything that we have to hear from the nominators. So any questions here? On the 15th, we'll be taking the final task force votes for the Mount Vernon Highway, the Huntington Metro Station, Old Colchester Road, Hopkins Lane, and the Huntington Avenue nomination.
Walter, this is Catherine. May I ask a question?
Yes.
On the, excuse me, on those final vote nights, will we be having discussion as well as voting?
Yes, we will have discussion.
Okay, could I make a suggestion? You know, we've got on the one on the 15th, there's an awful lot of nominations to look at. Is there a chance we might want to start a little bit so we're not here till midnight?
You said start a little earlier?
Yeah, I just throw it out as a thought. I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but there's quite a few to get through.
Right. Starting at 6 o'clock, is that what you had in mind?
You know, whatever anybody wants to do or not. I'm just throwing it out there.
I agree with that. I agree.
I'd just like to clarify, this is Jim Sargent, I'd like to clarify with staff and everything in terms of the meeting on the 15th. We have listed the issue of public comment and preliminary task force votes related in part to those two applications to be considered that evening, the Ingleside and Bellevue Shopping Center. I don't know if we anticipated additional comment on the final task force votes for the other ones listed. That's pretty much a straight up or down.
That's correct.
Correct?
That was my
Right.
question. On the final votes, are we just going to vote or will we have additional time to discuss?
We have discussion.
Our anticipation is that we will just have the vote up or down for the final vote one since they've been through the public hearing process. But we
Okay,
would anticipate additional comment, for example, with Ingleside or Bellevue. Since
yes,
those were
okay.
deferred on
All right,
preliminary
that's
vote.
fine. Thank you.
This is Queenie. So on September 15th, September 15th, before we vote, will someone, Aaron or Graham, kind of like let us know what the preliminary vote was for each case before the final vote?
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So you're saying we will not be able to discuss our vote or explain our vote?
The task force can have additional discussion, but there won't be public comments.
Oh, okay, understand.
And yes, we will inform you of what your preliminary votes were. And of course, you can change your vote as your final vote to something different if you want to.
So this is Holly Doherty, and I would suggest that have a heavy agenda at the next meeting, that we just allocate certain amounts of time for each nomination, and that, you know, everybody's clear that we're spending 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is, on each one, and that's it. So that we can get through it all.
Yes, Holly, and we'll make sure we have our stopwatches. We have it primed and ready. You're exactly right. So. Okay.
We could probably talk all night long about different things.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, any other questions regarding the upcoming meetings and timelines?
So we're gonna start at 6:30 then, and the 15th? Or 6?
Staff, Aaron, Graham, what do you guys think? Or what does?
I think the time that we have reserved for the two nominations where there's going to be preliminary votes, those will obviously be the big ones. If there's going to be 5-10 minutes for each nomination that's going through a final vote, it might start to get kind of timely. But we might want to check with the county attorney's office on moving the time frame back, because we did notify the neighborhoods, had the 6:30 start time on our website for quite some time. So we can check on that and circle back with the task force and then be able to put it out.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Holly again. My vote would be to stick with the time we've advertised and just control how much time we use for discussion.
Okay. So stay tuned, everyone. As of now, 6:30 is our start time, and we'll wait for staff's email to instruct us further. Okay, we want to have some Webex instructions.
Walter?
Yes.
This is Queenie. So if we were to move it back to 6 o'clock, how would the public know?
That we have to advertise for it. That's what we're checking with the county attorney to see if this will allow us enough time to advertise, to make sure that the public is aware, can join in on the call. So at this point, it's 6:30 is the stop time. And Graham, Aaron, I turn it over to you all with instructions.
Did you already mention about the Hilltop Village Center nomination, Walter?
I did.
Okay.
We would have that presentation on the 22nd, but the lead district is having the nominators presentation on September the 14th, and that we can join in as the public to listen in on the nominators presentation.
All right. I will go then to the Webex instructions. For any attendees who are not familiar with Webex, if you hover your mouse over the center bottom of the screen, you'll see a number of menu items pop up at the bottom. To the left, the left button is the microphone button, and when that is highlighted in red, the microphone is muted. It's in gray, it's open. Same with the next button, which is your camera mute button. If that's red again, no one can see you. If it's gray, they can see your image. Then the next button is the share screen button, and that's to share any content files on your screen with the rest of the group. The next button with the person there and the three lines, that's the participant button. That allows you to see the participants who are present in the meeting, and you can also send chats to individual participants within that as well. The next button over, the bubble button there is another chat box. That's just exclusively chat box button. And also within the participants button, you should see at the bottom right of your screen a hand that's the raise your hand function. So if you want to speak, You press that button and the host of the meeting will unmute your microphone. And let's see. And then also, if you're calling in and listening to the meeting via telephone, your raise your hand function is the *3 on your keypad. Okay, and so we just ask everyone, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone, because then we get a lot of feedback from that. And also for members of the public, when it's during the public comment period, and after you've raised your hand, when you're done speaking, you also need to go back to that raise your hand function and lower your hand, because the same thing will continue to hear sounds through your microphone if you have not lowered your hand. And we'll remind you about that again later.
I want to mention Lynn Pasco has joined us. So Lynn, can you hear us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my apologies. I fought with Webex tonight, and I lost the battle mostly. My apologies for being so late.
No problem, Lynn. Thank you. I think we've all at some point have been in that fight, so not a problem. Okay, the next agenda item is the SSPA screening stage reminder. Aaron, I believe you have a slide on that.
Yes, let me see. Okay, can everyone see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this is just kind of a refresher of where we are in the process. And what this slide is showing is, first of all, the 2 stages of the site-specific plan amendment process. And then to the right is a stage that may or may not come after this planning process. And I'll get to that in a moment. And so we have the planning process here, and then we have, and that also is within a larger development process. And that's what that stage to the far right is part of. So we're in the SSPA screening stage right now, where the blue arrow is pointing to. And again, to refresh everyone's memory, that what this is the task force, again, the task force review stage. And what the task force decision here is whether or not to add the nominations to the plan amendment work program, or the next stage of the process, the analysis stage. And you're not deciding whether to adopt nominations into the comprehensive plan or becoming part of the comprehensive plan at this stage. We're just talking about, are these ideas worthy of further study? And so that brings us to the analysis stage again. And so in this stage, I'm sorry, let me go back to screening one second here. So, and again, the task force is going to make a recommendation about whether the nominations should be added to the work program or not. Staff will also make a recommendation about whether they should be added to the work program or not. And those go forward to the Planning Commission. And at the Planning Commission public hearing, that's when the Planning Commission decides which nominations go on to the work program. And then the board, after that, and that gets forwarded to the board as a board action item, and they will make the decision to adopt the new work program. So that's what we're doing during this stage. And then the next stage of the process, again, is where we get into the really deep issues. So, and this is when staff is going to conduct the thorough in-depth analyses for you on transportation, the environment, housing. We can bring in other staff from other departments to talk to you about specific issues. And this is when we really get into the weeds on the issues here. And it's the same process. So both staff and the task force will make this time recommendations about, and at this point, the nominations are plan amendments because they're on the plan amendment work program. So at this stage, the recommendations are about whether to adopt the plan amendments into the comprehensive plan. So it's a little different. It's the structure is the same. Both staff and the task force make a recommendation to the planning commission, and then they hold a public hearing, and the planning commission makes a recommendation to the board, and the board makes the final decisions at their public hearing about which now plan amendments get adopted into the comprehensive plan. Now, what may or may not happen after this stage is some of these nominators may be submitting what we call concurrent rezoning applications. This is the next stage of things. The task force is not involved at this stage. This is just staff review, although applicants at this stage, they're called applicants now because they've submitted an application. They are encouraged to go out to the community and present to standing land use committees and so on and so forth, but not required. The only thing that's required is public hearings at this stage of the process. And again, some nominators are contemplating submitting an application right away, and many are not going to be doing that right away. Many will wait, and sometimes they'll change their minds about their plan amendment and they won't follow through with the development application. So does anybody have any questions about this?
Aaron, could you remind us of the timeline for all of this? We know when the screening process is completed. Could you speak to the SSPA analysis timelines?
Sure. So the analysis process that will begin, Graham, and if you can help me out on the dates here.
So Aaron, if I could just jump in. So the analysis phase will begin most likely in the couple of weeks after the board adopts the new work program. So we're looking at a work program that the board will take action on in January of 2021. And so the task force would reconvene for the work program implementation phase following that. And then there will be, depending on the complexity of the amendments, as well as sources to be able to work with the task force on these amendments that are added. The more I don't want to say simple, but the more straightforward plan amendments that are added, those could take upwards of 6 months to review and get to the planning commission and the board. And those that are more complex will go in probably 9 months to upwards of a year. Some might even go longer. So we're looking at most likely starting the work program implementation phase at the beginning of next year.
Are there other questions from the task force regarding this process and timeline? Okay, hearing none. Are we ready to review some nominations?
I think we are.
All right.
So this first nomination, let me pull my screen right now. 1 second. All right. So can everybody see my screen? I'm showing a PDF.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is SSPA nomination PC19 MV6. And it concerns the property that's located at 10208 Old Colchester Road. So it's in the Mount Vernon district in the Lorton area, relatively close to the Meadowood Recreation Area, if you're familiar with that portion of the district. The subject site is a landlocked, largely wooded parcel in the Lorton South Route 1 Suburban Center and the LP2 Community Planning Sector. Low-density residential uses abut the site to the southeast along Old Colchester Road, and industrial uses abut the site to the west along Giles Run Road. These residential and industrial uses are largely separated and buffered by a tree line of varying widths between these two areas. Within the LP2 community planning sector, this particular site is located in what's called subunit H4, which is shown here in the green. And this is planned for residential use at 0.2 to 0.5 dwelling units to the acre, with recommendations to provide a substantial buffering from the adjacent industrial uses to the west, which are located in subunit F2, which is shown here in gray. Properties immediately abutting the site to the south are similarly planned for residential uses at 0.2 to 0.5 dwelling units to the acre, and they're developed with low-density single-family homes. So the property to the west of the subject site is at 10125 Giles Run Road, which is shown here in the red dash outline. It's developed with a truck container storage use related to an excavation. Hi, Dave. How you doing? Mr. Labby, if you wouldn't mind, could you put your screen on mute? Thank you. So this site at 10125 Giles Run Road, it's under related ownership to the subject site and currently has outstanding violations from the Fairfax County Department of Planning and Health due to the lack of an approved site plan and a septic service, respectively. Aerial imagery indicates that the industrial use on the adjacent property on Giles Run Road appears to have encroached on portions of the subject site over time. So the nomination proposes to modify the boundaries within the LP2 community planning sector by moving approximately 1.21 acres of the subject site, which is shown here in red, from subunit H4 to subunit F2. So this modification of the subunit boundaries would amend the plan recommendation for the nominated portion of the area only from the adopted low-density residential use to industrial use. And this would be done to accommodate a septic field for the adjoining property at 10125 Giles Run Road. The nomination of this portion of the subject site in red is being pursued in order to remedy the health department violation. And the nomination would then prepare for a future rezoning application from the R1 residential district to the I6 heavy industrial district, as well as a potential lot line adjustment and the construction of the septic field on the adjoining industrial property. This creation of a septic field would be able to provide an avenue for the review of a site plan on the adjoining industrial property and this portion of the subject site. Okay, so when we're considering this nomination, staff notes that the construction of the proposed septic field would either reduce dramatically or potentially entirely remove the tree line that separates the industrial and low density residential uses from each other. And this tree line constitutes the buffer that the plan specifically envisions to remain in order to minimize potential land use conflicts. So given these considerations, MV6 is not recommended to be added to the Comprehensive Plan Amendment Work Program. This nomination would expand the boundaries of the industrial use recommendation and conflicts with the recommendations for the subunit regarding buffering the planned low-density residential use from the adjacent industrial uses. So that concludes my presentation. I saw that Gifford Hampshire, who is representing the nominator, is on the call, and I believe that he has a presentation as well. So let me see if I can pull him up. All right, Giff, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can.
Great.
I'm going to give you presenter privileges right now so you can share your screen.
All right. I believe that you all were going to control the presentation. Do you have it there on your end?
Let me pull it up really quickly.
Okay. You go ahead and pull it up and I'll start if that's all right with you. Good evening, members of the task force. My name is Gifford Hampshire. I'm with the law firm of Blankenship and Keith, and I represent Colchester LLC, which is the owner of the 10208 Colchester Road property. Charlie and Terry Sweeney are the representatives of Colchester. They're listening and watching. And joining me as a participant also is Aaron Vincent, who's an engineer with the Walter Phillips engineering firm. When Graham gets it, we'll see slide 5 that shows our proposal. Just by way of background, Mr. and Mrs. Sweeney are also representatives of Giles Run LLC that own the adjoining industrial property. And Graham, if you could turn to slide 5, that'd be great. That is the property that Graham referred to a little while ago. That property has been used, as you can see on this slide, you can see Giles Run Industrial LLC has been used, and I said in my nomination, for 30 years. Actually, it's been 35 years. It's been used for industrial purposes for which it is zoned and planned properly under the Fairfax County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Ordinance. And notably, there is no public sewer that's available in this area. And for 35 years, this property has been operating with a portable toilet, a Don's John, if you will, for septic. The county has issued violations or issued a violation back in the 90s, but never pursued it. But other than that, we move forward for 35 years almost without any pursuit of a violation. So then in 2019, we have a violation for lack of a proper site plan and lack of a proper septic field. And when we received those violations, we moved earnestly and quickly to try to resolve them. Now, fortunately for the Sweeneys, they, as was stated, they happen to own this property that's in question off Old Colchester Road. And so the idea was to employ a soil scientist and a septic designer to try to find, first of all, a septic field on site. And we verified that there is no such field on site. The soil is just too bad there. And either for a conventional system or some kind of alternative system. We also explored with our neighbors on each side whether or not they would be willing to give us an easement or a boundary line adjustment to allow that property to be used for a septic field, and they said no. So the only option that we have in order to continue an economically viable use consistent with the zoning and planning of this property, and fortunately we have this option, is to use a portion of the property in the back, zoned residential, planned residential right now, for a septic field. We went to the county to talk zoning evaluation about that, about our idea. And keep in mind, the Fairfax County zoning ordinance provides that a septic field cannot be used for different zoned property. In other words, you can't use property zoned R for a septic field to serve a property zoned I. So the idea was, well, let's rezone a very small portion of this 9-acre property. We're talking about 1.3 or 1.4 acres of a 9-acre property solely for a septic field with proffers that would restrict the use for that septic field and with buffering that would provide protection against the rest of the residential properties behind, and also a proffer that committed that property to open space in perpetuity. And that is shown graphically on this image. The county zoning evaluation responded that they would not support such a rezoning because the property is planned for R and not I, but did say to us, hey, there's a site-specific amendment process coming up in December. You can apply for that. And if we can get a plan amendment that makes this small area consistent with industrial planning, then we could conceivably support a rezoning under those conditions. And so that's exactly what we have before you today. And as stated in my justification statement, we will do exactly the same thing. We would propose a site-specific plan amendment that would, with the comprehensive plan being used as a vehicle, and you all saw on your July 28 orientation session that the comprehensive plan is a guide. So what we would propose is comprehensive plan language as a guide to any future rezoning that would say that this small portion of this 9-acre property could be used not for any industrial use, but only for a septic field and only with the buffering and the open space commitment that you see on this graphic. Now, we respectfully take issue with the staff recommendation based upon this graphic and based upon what I've just said, that the approval of this amendment would result in the reduction of the buffer. what you see here, and Graham, if you could go to slides 7 and 8, I believe they are. What you see here is the buffering. I think that is 6, so the next one. Right, it's coming up, is that we would provide, here's the field, there's the buffering that we would provide graphically as Aaron Vincent at Walter Phillips put down. And if you could move up one slide, Graham, you'll see how it looks today. It's a big open field. So what we would be doing is replacing these sparse deciduous trees with evergreen trees and other landscaping called for by the county DCSM and other standards, whatever standards might be decided upon in the rezoning. It would actually better the buffering and the screening than is there now. And significantly also with proffers that would commit this area to open space in perpetuity. So we think what we're presenting to you is really a win-win situation. Much has been said in the presentation about the concern about the residential area to the south. Well, we honor that and we respect that, and that's why we're proposing this buffering with the open space. But also keep in mind that this Lorton planning section also has industrial property in it. Industrial property that the county has said needs to be able to survive. And so this is a win-win in the sense that it allows a industrially zoned and planned property to continue as an economically viable use, but at the same time, better preserves and buffers the comprehensive plan guidance that calls for the buffering and open space that is properly called for by the comprehensive plan. And again, we want to reiterate that the plan amendment would be for no other purpose than a septic field. And Graham, if you could go to slide 3, I think it is. That would be good. And this is correct. Here we go. So this is what Graham referred to in his presentation. This is the comprehensive plan guidance from page 63 of the Lorton South Route 1 community planning section. And based upon what I've just presented, I'd like the task force to reflect on whether we would be honoring these comprehensive plan goals by the proposal that I've just explained. We think that we are having no impact, and we are indeed preserving existing stable residential neighborhoods. If you recall the earlier graphic, you will recall 3 houses in the back. We are having no impact on those houses and no impact on any other existing stable residential neighborhood. In fact, we are better preserving those residential neighborhoods while providing for this preservation of open space and buffering. And with respect to the second bullet, we are buffering residential areas from otherwise intrusive adjacent non-residential uses. We are bettering the buffering, and we are preserving that buffering in perpetuity. And again, we are protecting stable neighborhoods from encroachment by that industrial use. So again, we think we have a win-win for the county. Graham, if you could go to slide, I believe it's slide 2, that'd be good. Not 2, I'm sorry, slide 4, please. So anyway, so I'd just like to clarify, and this is maybe a more minor point here, but it was referred to in the staff report. We have here a juxtaposition not only between residential and industrial uses, but we have that very same boundary between these two properties is also the boundary between the industrial unit F2 subunit and the subunit H4, which is the residential one. And if you look down here, the second paragraph, you will see that it says that in the second half of the second paragraph, therefore, substantial buffering and screening should be provided between these different land uses, meaning the industrial land use and the residential land. Now, we think, in addition to the general guidance that you saw earlier on slide 3, we are also honoring this guidance. But keep in mind, the whole point of this exercise is to move that boundary very slightly to allow it to be so buffered. So we think we are honoring both the general guidance for the community-wide plan for the LP2, and also, to the extent it applies, the guidance for subunit H4.
Mr. Hampshire, can we?
Yes, sir.
we nearing our time, so we can get the task force to be able to comment on this as well as have public comment. And so we're nearing your time here. How much more?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think I am done, actually.
Okay.
And so then I will stop and welcome any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation, sir.
Thank you.
Members of the task force, are there questions?
This is Queenie.
Go ahead, Queenie.
Oh, I guess my question is, currently, isn't there an encroachment on the industrial services on the residential piece now?
Yes, and I anticipated that you would ask that question, ma'am, and we would be prepared, and we are going to be moving that area back. So the nature, and that is just kind of accreted over time, and that would be resolved through this as well.
And then I guess my other question would be that because it's a septic operation, how does the homeowners that the property is abutting and that's close by, the effect of the smell and the noise of the trucks? And also, what about resolving those health violations?
Yes, ma'am. Well, I meant to mention that we contacted the 4 homeowners behind us, and 3 of them have responded, and all 3 say they have no problem with what we're proposing. As far as smell goes, there is no smell if it's working properly to a septic field, and that's the whole point of permitting it and making sure that the soil is proper for a septic field. And I also meant to mention that we actually do have now health department approval for that septic field through the work of our septic soil scientists and our septic designer. And so the soil should work properly and there should be no smell. The industrial use is there now. I'm not aware of any smells coming from that industrial use. It's an area where machinery and equipment is stored and repaired and dispatched to excavation sites. So there's nothing organic, if you will, going on that property.
Okay, and I guess my last question or statement would be that you just mentioned that there are only 4 homeowners that are affected by this proposal for extending the boundaries.
Well, affected in the sense that they are the ones that are behind us. So that's what I was referring to. The ones that are joining us to the rear are okay, with the exception of one that we haven't been able to hear back from yet.
But there are more than 4 homeowners there, correct?
Well, when you say there, what I'm referring to, if you, Graham, maybe we could go back to slide 5. And,
well, I guess that the other part of my question would be that because you mentioned that there were 4 that would be closely affected, and out of the 4, 3 have no objection to your proposal. Now, were their proposals or their agreement, did you obtain that in written form or oral?
No, we just went and visited with them, talked to them. My client did.
Okay.
We showed them what we're showing you right now, and we asked them if they had any problem with it, and they said no.
Okay. And so what is the name of their homeowners association?
As far as I know, ma'am, they don't have one. I also meant to mention, they're just, their lots they're rural, low-density lots. I also meant to mention that we also touched base with the Mason Neck Civic Association. We spoke to Peter Whalen there. He met us on the site, on the industrial site yesterday, and we explained it to him. He was not able to speak for the Civic Association. He did share that he personally didn't have a problem with it, but he was going to take it back to the Civic Association. We haven't heard anything back, but that was only just yesterday. I'd also like to just take the opportunity to say that, as Graham said earlier, or I think it was Aaron who said earlier, all we're asking for at this point in time is to be admitted to the work program for analysis of these issues. We think it's meritorious for that analysis for all the reasons I've stated, because again, it honors the comprehensive plan language for buffering and protection of the residential areas, while at the same time allows industrially zoned property to operate.
Mr. Hampshire, this is Catherine Ward. I have one quick question. I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
want a clarification, please. You showed evergreen trees and the deciduous trees that are there now. Did you say that your intention was to use the evergreens to replace the deciduous or to be put in front of them? Because your picture shows deciduous trees still existing and then this evergreen collection.
Gift, this is Aaron, if you'd like me to speak to that. This is Aaron Vincent with Walter Phillips. What I would, that's a good question. What we're proposing is where the septic field would be located, there would be a limited removal of trees because the septic field cannot have trees within it. So we would be proposing to remove a limited number of existing deciduous trees, which you can see in this slide, sort of by that open area where you see the sky in the middle of the existing tree line. And then we are going to be enhancing that buffer by providing a mix of evergreen trees in sort of a triple staggered row to increase the buffering and decrease visibility into our site from the surrounding residential properties.
Thank you. And I don't want to get into the weeds because this is just a whether we decide to let you into the process or not. But there is a tendency for developers of any kind to plant twigs as opposed to a good sized tree, and evergreens grow so slowly that I would just put that out there, that if you are put into the program, you've got to put some good size in there to start that buffering early.
That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Our intention is to provide trees that meet the PFM's definition for Category 3 or Category 4 trees at time of planting. So what we would be proposing is trees that are going to vary depending on the species, but will be roughly 6 to 10 feet at time of planting.
Perfect. Thank you for the comment.
This is Hillary Clausen. I did want to make one disclosure, and that is I'm president of the Basin Neck Citizens Association. And I'm aware that Peter Whalen did meet with these folks yesterday. I do have two questions. One is, what other options are there if a septic field isn't installed here? You mentioned there weren't any price or cost efficient other ways to do it, but what other options might there be?
This is Aaron Vincent again. I want to answer your question without sounding overly dramatic, but the short answer is we're not sure beyond this. This is something in the neighborhood of one of our options of last resort. We have explored 4 or 5 different options before we arrived at this. We were obviously hesitant to go through a comp plan process because we were hopeful that there would be a better way to do it. So that's why we explored septic on neighboring properties. We explored septic on this site. We explored continuing a temporary use, pump and haul, lots of different options. But what we've arrived at is we think this is the most viable long-term option that allows us to continue to operate the industrial property in its current intensity.
Okay, and second question for Mr. Gifford. Was this property, the old Colchester property, purchased with this purpose in mind?
Yes, and that's something else I meant to mention earlier. It was precisely purchased by my client for a buffer. And so in an interesting sort of way, this would allow the property to be used for even a better buffer than was originally proposed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, this is Dave Levine, and I have a couple of questions. So Mr. Hampshire, you mentioned that you couldn't put the septic service tank on the property itself, and the adjacent properties would not work. I guess the ones that you're looking for an easement for. But question is, you also mentioned that it's because of the soil. Why would the soil be so different on this adjacent property from the one you're on? Like what's special about this?
I'm not competent to answer that question. The only thing because I'm not a soil scientist, but what I can tell you that our soil scientists have told us after review is that they've looked on this site and on the industrial site, and soils are not suitable. But they are on just over the line on this area, and that's not really unusual. You know, you can have properties right next to each other, and the soils can change. I should also mention that years ago, if you look at page 2 of your staff report, has a good illustration of this lot. You'll see that the lot is kind of shaped like a bow tie. It's a 9-acre lot, and 3 acres of it are what we're talking about now. The remainder of those 3 acres would be put into open space. But you follow a little line around, and you'll see that the remainder of this lot is 6 acres, and it wraps around the Wilcox lot, or the lot in between, the one that you're referring to. And actually, in the 1980s, my client was able to locate a septic field there. And unfortunately, they were not able to use it for this site because the county, unfortunately for them, I should say, enacted a zoning ordinance amendment back then that is what we have today, and that is that residential property can't be used to serve industrial property and vice versa. So that didn't go anywhere at the time. But that's just an illustration by way of answering your question, Mr. Levine, that you can have soil that differs very markedly in terms of suitability for septic in a relatively short distance.
Okay. And one other question is, you mentioned you're going to keep this as just open land, open space, and it would have the septic system in there. But I mean, would it, you know, potentially be a spot where you're parking trucks or other, you know, other supplies, whatnot, on the site?
No, sir. We would not do anything except use it as a septic field, and there would be proffers. Aaron mentioned earlier that rezonings may follow this process, so that in any future rezoning, the idea is that the comprehensive plan guidance would require this to be a septic field and open space. And so in order to, you know, practically, in order to get a positive staff recommendation, positive recommendation from the Planning Commission and approval by the board, the rezone would need to be consistent with that comprehensive plan guidance by providing those things in the form of proffers. That's the idea. And
Okay.
so that way the county could enforce it.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Thank you. So, Graham, can we ask if there are any public comments?
Mary, I had 2 questions. I put my hand up, but it didn't work. One is to the planning department. They seem to object to the buffer change, while the developer says it's a superior buffer. Could I hear from planning why you object to the proposed buffer? And then to the developer, would you maintain this buffer forever, as well as the open space?
So Mary, can you hear me? This is Graham. So with regards to the buffer that's shown on Mr. Hampshire's slides, that's a part of the presentation, and I think that's something that they're considering in earnest in terms of putting back evergreen trees. What we have in terms of the plan right now is a buffer that is supposed to remain. It's a buffer between industrial properties and residential properties, with the idea that these are in some ways fundamentally inconsistent land uses in some instances. You have an area of the site that's currently, as I'm showing in this slide, where the industrial use already started to encroach over time into that area that would otherwise be a buffer area. And so by removing even further, you are taking out virgin or older growth forests, which has a benefit from a sound perspective, from a visual perspective. So I don't want to comment on the buffer that they're proposing at this point, because that's a part of their presentation. But we think that the existing buffer that's shown here has a function and serves it well. So I don't know if we have a perfect answer to your question, because the details of what they've proposed in terms of the putback, so to speak, are that's a bit further down the line. But this is an area, the owner of this property does, has related ownership with the industrial property. Ownership does change over time, and not only on the subject sites, but on the surrounding sites. So in terms of our planning horizon, looking into the future, the immediacy of the adjacent owners and their, if it's not a, approval of it, or if it's just a tacit endorsement of it, we're trying to look at the long term in terms of how we buffer land uses in the county in this area. So,
and in order to answer the question you posed to me, ma'am, as I said earlier, and in answer to what Graham just said, again, the comprehensive plan guidance that we're advocating be part of the would recommend that any future rezoning would provide for this buffering, this increased buffering, we call it, and also preserve the remainder of that 3-acre portion of this 9-acre site in open space in perpetuity. And that would be done through proffers that would run with the land, regardless of change of ownership. And unless the county somehow changed those proffers through a proper condition amendment, that would remain there forever. But the county would have control through a proffer condition amendment, whether or not ever to allow that to change. But we think that's pretty good protection. And it would be enforced through zoning enforcement like any other proffer. If in the future, the owner allowed that buffer to die, wasn't maintained, or tried to build something on that open space, then the violation of that proffer would generate a zoning violation complaint and prosecution just like any other.
Thank you.
I have a question, if it's all right.
Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Hampshire, this looks like a very active site. Do you know about how many jobs, how many people are employed by the business there?
Yes, ma'am. There are 4 to 5 employees on the site. Keep in mind, the site is used largely for the storage of machinery, the repair of machinery, and excavation containers that go to job sites. So it's not a personnel intensive site for its size. It's a equipment intensive site. And that's why you see all that stuff there.
Okay, great.
And that's precisely why it's been able to get along all these years with a Don's John, essentially, for a septic solution, which has been okay. Well, they've been surviving with all this time.
So what are the options, just so I understand, if this is not approved, what are the options available to the business owners? Are they going to be able to continue their operations there? Will they have to shut down? What are their options?
Well, I mean, I think we have explored. I don't think they have any other options, to tell you the truth. And that's the gravity of this situation, is that having explored septic on site, both conventional and alternative systems, having asked adjoining property owners for an easement or a boundary line adjustment and having been turned down. And in recognition that there's no public sewer in the area, the closest sewer is miles away north on Route 1, they're left with an industrial use that's zoned and planned for industrial that they can't use in an economically viable way because they don't have a septic system that the county will allow. Having been in business for 35 years using a Don's John without really any problem as far as they're concerned, we understand the county has a problem with it. So this is a pretty grave situation, and that's why I mentioned that the concern about the residential neighborhoods also needs to be balanced against other valid uses that are properly planned and zoned, namely industrial uses. And we think this is a good way of balancing those two competing interests by allowing the industrial use to continue and while at the same time providing for buffering and protection to the residential area to the south. Or at least we ought to be allowed into the work program to discuss it further. And that's what we're asking for at this stage.
So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is if there aren't some accommodations made to allow for this development of a septic field, that the business would have to close?
Correct.
And the county would lose the people here, we'd lose those services, we'd lose those jobs.
Yes, ma'am. And keep in mind that, in this economy, that those industrial uses have to go somewhere. Right. It's a needed excavation business is a needed business. Anytime there's a construction site, excavators are needed. Heavy equipment is needed to move that dirt around.
We want to revitalize Richmond Highway. We have to have the equipment to do it, right?
I'm sorry, this is Catherine. I know this is running long, but Holly brought up a couple of good points, and I just have a couple one quick question. Both for staff as well as the nominator. Are y'all familiar with composting toilets?
Composting toilets?
Yes. They're environmentally friendly. They have them all over the world. Appalachian Trail has them with hundreds and hundreds of people using them on a daily basis. They're phenomenal. They're clean. They're lovely. They are not Don's Johns. And if the issue is the county doesn't want you to have, they want you to have a septic field because they find the Don's Johns not good, and we're pushing environmentally friendly things in the county, I would encourage you guys to look at composting toilets. They're amazing.
Thank you. Whatever we do, it has to be permitted by the health department. Aaron, Vincent, do you have any knowledge about composting toilets?
Just a tiny bit, enough to pretend I know what I'm talking about. But I would say that that's something that we can certainly continue to look at. My understanding, limited as it may be, as to how the health department would view those is that I would presume they would view them as temporary facilities, meaning I would not expect them to be adequate to support a permanent and an ongoing use.
Well, they are. If you go up the Appalachian Trail and a few other locations, and I've done that with hundreds of people, they are permanent. They are lovely. They don't stink. They're accepted in national forests like crazy. So I have a hard time believing the health department wouldn't buy into them here. So
sure, no, that's a great point, and we'll continue to pursue that. We'll consider that option and see. We'll talk to the health department about whether they would consider that. Thanks for that.
Hey, Graham, do we have anyone from the public on the line with questions or comments?
Members of the public, if you would like to speak on this nomination, now is the time to raise your hand. You can do that by going into the participants panel, clicking on that button, and then you'll see a hand that'll let you know that it's your turn to speak. Also, if you're calling in by phone, just hit *3 on your dial pad, and that'll allow people to allow us to know that you want to speak. And I'm not seeing any.
Okay, then no further questions or comments from the task force. I think we're ready for a preliminary vote.
How about a motion? I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, Holly.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that we include this nomination in the work plan.
Is there a second from the task force?
This is David. I second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Who
Nay.
is that?
Nay.
Okay, who are the nays?
Pasco.
Queenie.
Okay. Who?
Hillary Clausen.
Okay. Anybody else?
Did you get Queenie?
We have, Queenie, how did you vote?
Nay.
Yeah, okay, Queenie voted nay. All right. So we have, we've had eight yes votes and 3 no votes. Is that, that match the count? Okay, the motion passes to allow this for consideration. Final vote.
Well, this is Queenie. And I kind of object to having a motion made in the manner that Holly just presented, because I thought we would have an opportunity to have a final vote, and particularly since Mason Neck is in discussions with this particular nomination, we may end up having additional information on, doing the final vote. So I don't really appreciate having Holly jump in and throw this, throw this motion in.
Well, Queenie, I'll
We didn't do it for the other ones. I'm just saying, we did not do this for the others.
Yes, we
Well,
did.
let's clarify. This is indeed interpreted as a preliminary vote.
Okay.
Is that your understanding?
Well,
Holly?
this just starts the process. I mean, my motion was to include it in the work plan, but this is not to disallow any input from the Mason Neck Civic Association or anyone else. This just starts a discussion. This just starts the process going. We're just saying
But I
that
thought
this
you said
has.
it was a final. I thought you said it for the final vote.
No, we're not taking final votes tonight. Final
No,
votes are
but
on the 15th.
but that's already
My motion was to include it in the work plan. Right.
Preliminary. This is a preliminary
That's
vote.
correct.
Oh, but that's not what she said at first. Okay. All right. If it's just a preliminary, because that's not what I heard. I heard as the final vote. I'm sorry, okay? If this is just the preliminary, I'm okay with that, but not to be included as the final vote.
Mr. Chairman, this is David again. Could you clarify that? We'll be doing the final vote on the 15th on this nomination?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
This for all, if there's any confusion, this is a preliminary vote as to whether or not to consider it for a final vote. That's what's basically happening this evening. It is not to be the final vote for this particular nomination.
Do we have any abstentions?
Sorry, say again, please.
This is Tracy. Did we have any abstentions? We had 8 in favor, 3 opposed. Did we have any abstentions?
We have some absence. We have an absence, but we don't have abstentions that I heard. Were there any abstentions? I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
And to Queenie's point, keep in mind, we may receive some public comments in between tonight and the 15th. that we would have that information available before we go to a final vote. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hemshar. We appreciate that. And we can move
Thanks
along
very
to
much
our
for the
next
task
topic.
force.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you. And we can move on now to our next nominator, 8160-8208 Mount Vernon Highway, PC 19-MV-003. We're ready for staff report.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi. My name is Serge Suzuki. I'm Planner 1, and I'll be presenting PC19 MV003 for you all tonight. So site-specific plan amendment nomination PC19 MV003 concerns property located east of the Richmond Highway corridor along Mount Vernon Highway in the northern portion of Mount Vernon Supervisor District, shown in the graphic. The nomination area, shown in the white outline, is located along the west side of Mount Vernon Highway, generally south and west of its intersection with Richmond Highway, south and west of Little Hunting Creek. These properties have been developed as single-family detached homes. The subject area is surrounded by vacant land and commercial properties to the north and northeast along Richmond Highway and Mount Vernon Highway, and residential uses at a variety of densities to the west and south. The nomination area, shown here in blue, is planned within the Mount Vernon Planning District, Richmond Highway Corridor Plan, suburban neighborhood area between Hybla Valley and South Community Business Center, South County Community Business Center, and recommendation area number 5. Recommendation area number 5, which is outlined within the dark blue dotted line, is an area generally north of Mount Vernon Highway, south of Richmond Highway, and east of the Mount V Townhouse subdivision. The current comprehensive plan recommendation area number 5 is for residential use at an overall intensity of 5 to 8 dwelling units per acre. The plan recommends higher density at 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre if substantial consolidation of the area is achieved, and that density should taper from Richmond Highway to Mount Vernon Highway with effective buffering and screening to the south. Development along Mount Vernon Highway, including the nomination area, should be limited to single-family detached houses at 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre. The nomination site is within a suburban neighborhood area, which is encouraged to remain predominantly residential in character and for redevelopment to occur where appropriate per Richmond Highway corridor-wide guidance. The nomination proposes to modify the plan text for recommendation area number 5 along Mount Vernon Highway by increasing the residential density on the nomination area from 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre to 5 to 8 dwelling units per acre, citing the Richmond Highway corridor guidance that encourages the suburban neighborhood areas to remain predominantly residential in character and redevelopment to occur where appropriate as justification for the proposal. Staff's primary consideration when reviewing this nomination is that, as proposed, the nomination would effectively harvest planned housing units from elsewhere in recommendation area number 5, shown in yellow above, including areas along Richmond Highway, because of the overall density recommendation for the area. This would be counter to the goal of concentrating density near the highway. Separately, the additional areas subject to this residential redevelopment option in recommendation area number 5 are affected to a varying degree by the ongoing Richmond Highway Corridor Improvement Project, RHCIP, from Jeff Todd Way to Napa Road, which is currently in the design phase. The RHCIP proposes realignment of the intersection of Mount Vernon Highway and Richmond Highway southwest of its current location, as shown on the graphic. The corridor-wide guidance recommends that consolidations of land for redevelopment occur in neighborhoods along the corridor only when the site layout can support reasonable and appropriate development and establish effective transitions to the stable neighborhoods through compatible land use, intensity, and scale. Considering the road improvements in the area and the effect on nearby properties, assessing alternative options for the subject site and the additional properties in recommendation area number 5 may result in opportunities for more compatible development. For these reasons, staff recommends that PC 19 MV003 be added to the Comprehensive Plan Amendment Work Program as part of an evaluation of the recommended land use and density planned in recommendation area number 5. The nomination warrants further consideration relative to the goals for the suburban neighborhood area, including compatible land uses, establishing effective transitions from Richmond Highway to the surrounding stable neighborhoods, and opportunities for affordable housing, among other considerations. Expanding the study area to include all of the parcels in recommendation area number 5 would ensure planned density along Richmond Highway is not inadvertently reduced. And that's the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
I have a quick question. This is Holly Doherty. Does the nominator own this property?
Holly, we have the nominator here, and they can speak to that. I think they were going to do a presentation just now.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
If you're there, I'm going to pull up the presentation so that you can view it. Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Graham. And while you're doing that, good evening. My name is Lori Greenleaf. I'm a land use planner with McGuire Woods. And on our call tonight is Dick Labby with Eastwood Properties, who's the nominator for this nomination. I am going to be brief. Staff did a very thorough job with the preliminary staff report and presentation. And on behalf of Eastwood Properties, I want to initially state that we do agree with staff that it makes sense to study sub-area 5 as a whole. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts the many varied zoning districts which surround the subject property or the nominated parcel. With our nomination, we concentrated, as you can see in the red outline area, properties lying between the subdivisions southeast and the commercial properties along Richmond Highway, with the idea that thoughtful replanning and redevelopment of these could provide a logical transition from the commercial properties on Richmond Highway to those residences. The thought behind the nomination was that the current plan language does not incentivize revitalization of this area corridor that's envisioned by the Richmond Highway Plan as a whole. And what we were envisioning for these properties is small lot, single family homes in keeping with the suburban neighborhood general language. And that's something that the rezonings that have occurred up and down Richmond Highway have not provided. Have for the most part provided a multi-family product.
Lori,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Tim. Could we ask everybody to make sure your microphones are on mute, please? Everybody, please turn their microphones on mute. All right, Lori, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, for the most part, multifamily products have been the subject of rezoning applications. And the thought was that small lot, single family homes would attract first time home buyers or empty nesters. And that's a product that the R2 zoning or the R3, it's now planned 2 to 3. So half acre to a third acre planning densities and zonings do not encourage that type of product. A planned density of 5 to 8 that we were proposing would provide some diversified housing for the corridor and that sort of missing middle that we keep hearing about. Next slide, please. But staff does make a good point that the relationship, these R2 properties, which are shown in yellow, to the properties that border Richmond Highway is also important. And it's important how this sub-area works as a whole. Thus, we do respectfully request that our nomination area, as well as the remainder of sub-area 5, be placed on the work program so that we can begin to work with staff on what would be appropriate densities for this and appropriate transitions and appropriate buffer areas. And we'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh, in terms of owning the property, no, I don't believe that Eastwood Properties owns any of those properties. I think they do. They might have some under contract in the yellow area at the present time. Dick, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
If you can hear me, this is Dick Labby, and that is correct. We do not own the properties, but we do control them contractually.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Other questions from the task force?
This is Catherine. I don't have a question, but I'd like to make a statement. And what I'm going to say is just for the interest of those on the force. When we move forward, we should get into the work plan. When realtors or nominators or developers put properties under contract where they, quote, control that, that can have devastating implications to the landowner when they're not smart enough to understand what can happen to them. A number of years ago in Lee District, properties were contract but not owned the nominator. And did it's because they changing the zoning, changing the density, etc. The tax implications to those actual owners was horrific. And everybody had to jump through the hoops when this deal fell through to get those landowners made whole again as far as their tax implications. I've sent an email to this matter to everybody on the planning staff as well as Supervisor Stork's office. So I just want to make people aware of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Other questions or comments? And Graham, do we have questions or comments from the public?
Members of the public, if you'd like to speak on this nomination, please raise your hand by pressing the raise your hand button in the participants panel. And if you're calling in by phone, you can hit *3. And I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Thank you. There are no further questions or comments from the task force committee. I believe we're ready for a motion.
We hear a motion from the task force members. This, once again, this is a preliminary vote, not the final vote for this nomination.
This is Gretchen Wazzle. I say we move forward on this. I wasn't in fast enough to say that this group did become before the Planning and Zoning Committee. And so we heard most of this, but we had asked them also to come back when they had a more concise plan. Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
We have a motion.
Yeah, this is Mary. I'll second the motion. I think this is a good place for missing middle housing.
Okay, so a motion has been seconded by Mary. Do we have a vote? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you very much.
This is once again a preliminary vote. There will be a final vote on, I believe, the 15th. I believe that's it for the evening.
I have a question though. This is Queenie.
Yes, Queenie.
Okay. Will we become, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to make a comment on the staff report for 004. Because the nominator, he withdrew the nomination, but I have a concern about the option that was presented in the staff report.
Queenie, I mean, we notified folks of this hearing, this notification, for this meeting, for that nomination. If you wanted to ask, feel free, of course.
Okay, it's just that I supported the staff recommending that the nomination not move forward. But one of the reasons that the reason it provided for not recommending the nomination is that it was going to the conservation plan had expired. But what staff failed to state in there was that the Board of Supervisors approved the reactivation of the Gum Springs Conservation Plan, and that Gum Springs provided a draft of the conservation plan August of 2015. And Gum Springs is still waiting on the review of that. And having this heritage resources survey is not a replacement for the conservation plan. And I think that is extremely important and should be included in the staff recommendation report, because otherwise it's misleading as far as Gum Springs is concerned.
Queenie, we appreciate that. And I think what we were trying to do with our recommendation is acknowledge that we have this heritage resources survey, but there are other elements that are important. And when we're considering the Gum Springs community, in particular the conservation plan that you mentioned, also the redevelopment plan. I think in terms of the real estate of the report, we're working with one page, but those are all factors that led to our consideration that at this time we were thinking that the nomination that was put forward should not move forward, but there should be a larger engagement with Gum Springs to talk about the whole neighborhood and not just the dominated area. So, but that's a fair comment, and I think we could talk about that more.
Okay, because the conservation plan is much more important than the survey, because the survey could very well not move forward as well. And where would we be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Gosh, Kathy, you beat me to it. Tim and I was kind of.
We're sitting here trying to be too polite and back and forth at each other.
Yeah, but
you
it
just go ahead.
knows me and I'm not polite. I just get to the bottom line.
Tracy seconds. Tracy Wood seconds that motion.
Thanks, Tracy.
But then Catherine's ruder that we're going to move forward.
All in favor of the motion to, all right, now, too much fun here. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very, very much, and thanks to our nominators who participated, and as well as to staff for preparation, and we appreciate it. We'll see you on September 15th.
Thank you,
guys.
Thank you.
Ciao, everybody.
Right. Thanks.
Good night.
Oh, and